Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I'm sharing 10 birthday cards with the Simon Says Stamp August card kit. And I'm going to jump right into my very first card, which is using one of the pandas from the stamp set. This is the panda that is lying down, and I decided to stamp a rainbow of pandas, so I'm not stamping them black, I'm stamping them in a rainbow of colours. I started with lemon zest and orange slash inks, which is Simon Says Stamp inks. I then used ruby red Altenew ink, midnight violet, which is also Altenew, Wisteria, which is a Simon Says Stamp ink, Dusk, which is Altenew, and then my green is Lucky Clover, which is another Simon Says Stamp ink. I didn't actually end up using all of these because I realised they wouldn't fit on my card base, but I stamped out the full rainbow anyway. Having got them all stamped out, I'm going to fussy cut them out with my scissors, and I'll just show doing one of those, and I did the rest off screen. I then stamped my sentiment onto a white panel of card using Versatile Onyx Black ink, and here you can see how those pandas look when they're stacked up. I'm using an ink blending brush and some Catherine Pooler Twilight ink to just ink blend a shadow for the bottom of my totem of pandas, or tower, however you want to think of it. This will just help ground them a little and make it look like they're not just floating in space. I brought in a light grey Spectrum Noir Illustrator marker just to add a little bit of shading to all of the pandas, and I will blend this out with my blender pen as well. I'm putting the shading as if the light source is the top right hand side, and actually just now as I'm doing this voiceover I realised I probably should have added shading to take into account them being stacked on top of each other, but I didn't actually do that. I don't think it matters too much though. And you could also, if you want, colour in their little bow ties, but I left them just as they were as outlines, so I was keeping this quite simple. I have a piece of the pattern paper that came in the kit, and I've trimmed away the centre of it to conserve it for using later. I'll adhere that to my black card base and then put the white panel on top of it, the panel where I had added my sentiment. And I'm just using Tombow Mono Multi liquid glue for adhering everything into place, including the pandas. And in between I'll put the glue into my glue holder, which is from Make It by Marco. I really like this glue holder, and I can keep the glue upside down doing that so it will be ready to use. Having adhered everything into place, I decided I would add some confetti down in that white space on the right hand side of the card. I was going to use all of the same ink colours, but I actually decided to just do 3 clusters in the yellow. I then added Ebony Black Nuvo drops to their eyes, and once that was dry I added shine to the eyes by adding some white gel pen. And that will complete my first card. Quite a fun little birthday card there with the rainbow colours. Moving on to card number 2, I'm going to be using the panda die that came in the kit. This is the picture book panda die. I cut it once from white card and once from black card, which I had covered on the front side with double-sided tape. And I'm going to put them tape side down onto the flock that also came in the kit. Actually, I didn't really need to do it once from white and once from black because it's going to get the colour from the flock anyway, so I wouldn't have had to cut it twice. I could have just done it once, but it doesn't matter too much. I end up using the other pieces in a little while anyway. So once I place them on the flock, I run them through my die cutting machine just to press them in, and then peel the papers off of the flock, and it will have that fuzziness stuck to the pieces. I did find it a little bit tricky to peel them back off, but I did manage in the end. I just was a bit concerned I was going to tear them. Once they were ready, I used the negative piece of the panda as a guide to help me piece all the pieces together onto a snippet of white card, which is just going to help me hold them all in place. I think the eye pieces aren't identical on each side, and the same with the ears, so you need to make sure that you get them into the correct position. And then there's also these teeny tiny little pieces that go into those eye patches, and then also I did die cut another little nose so I could colour that in pink and just put that into place as well. And then I'll fussy cut away that overhanging card from the background so that my panda is just panda shaped. You could of course skip this by just adhering the panda directly to your panel rather than adding a piece of card behind him. I'm using some of the pattern papers again for my background, and I have die cut the front one with a cat scrappiness die, and I will use the negative pieces from those windows on a later card. I backed it with a different pattern paper and then stamped my sentiment into the windows on the left and right hand side and added my panda in the middle. I stamped the party hat onto one of the other pattern papers and fussy cut it out and adhered that to the panda's head. And then I'm going to use a green card base, but I'm going to use some of the confetti stamps again to add some interest to the card base with Forest Glades ink stamped all around the outside for a nice tone-on-tone look. I then popped up my focal panel onto the card base and added an enamel dot to the top of the panda's party hat before giving him some Nuvo drop eyes, which again I added white gelled pen to once they had dried to give them a bit of shine. And that completes my second card. Card number 3 took me a very long time. There are no pandas on this one. This is an almost entirely one layer card using the presents and the happy balloons. And I started by marking on the card base where I wanted the knot of the happy to be. And then I'm going to start stamping the presents using MFT Black Licorice Hybrid ink, which is alcohol marker friendly. And I have also created myself some masks from post-it tape to cover up the presents that I have stamped so that I can get a nice continuous design. I'm going to work through this very quickly. I did realise that where I'd put the mark to show where I wanted that knot to be was actually going to have to move up a little, because otherwise my pyramid of presents wasn't quite working, but I worked it out in the end with minor adjustments and added the happy balloons. I'm again going with rainbow colours because that's what the kit seemed to want us to do, so that's what I will do. And I'm starting with red for the H balloon, and you can see the colours. I have the caps on the screen so that you can see which colours I have used, and I'll work in rainbow order from left to right. I tried to go with quite a high contrast on the balloons because I felt that looked a bit more realistic, and I do put my shadows pretty much every time I colour. I put my shadows on the left hand side as if the light is coming from the top right, but you also need to consider where the balloons are overlapping each other. So the yellow P is behind the A and the green P, so it will have shadows where those ones are in front of it. And then finally I'm going to use blue for the Y, and my camera did actually die in the middle of colouring this, so I couldn't show all the colours that I'd used, but I did use the exact same colours as I'd used on the balloons to colour all my presents, so here you can see the blues that I used for that. When colouring the presents, I tried to spread out my colours, so I have that blue present in the foreground, and then I used the blue for a ribbon over to the right hand side, dots over to the left hand side, and so on. I tried to kind of spread the colours out. I didn't do as good of a job as I would have liked because I got to the end and realised I still had white spaces and had used all of my colours, and then I had to try and fill back in, and it just ended up with some colours too close together in my opinion, but I don't think it looks too bad once it's finished. But the colouring of this card, as I said, it took me quite a long time. The stamping and masking did as well, to be honest. But in total, this card took me almost 2 hours. I think I had an hour and 40 minutes of footage. And that didn't include stamping and cutting the masks, for example. So it did take me quite a while to do this. But it's quite straightforward, really, just doing all the colouring, and I found it easiest to work with one colour at a time until I was happy with how it looked. And I obviously have sped it up quite a lot because otherwise you'd be sitting here forever watching it. Once I had finished colouring all the presents, I did go in and colour the tags as well, just with a light creamy colour just to give them some shading. I then brought in some greys to add some shadow below the presents to ground them. I also decided to add some sparkle with the glitter brush pen that came in the kit, and I added that to the balloons, all the bows, and then certain parts of the presents, so the spots and some of the stripes. I white heat embossed birthday on a black piece of card to complete the sentiment, and I did pop that up so it's no longer a one layer card. but that completes card number 3. So then we will move on to card number 4, and here is where I'm going to use those remaining pieces of the die cut panda from earlier. And I decided I would foil them using the foil from the previous kit, the July kit, which had the bees. So I have a piece of post-it note just to hold the pieces in place as I'm doing this, which was a better idea in theory than it actually worked out to be because it was a bit fiddly. And I'm removing the tape and then just holding the pieces in place all together because I want the gradient of the foil to be consistent once I add it on. So once all the pieces were down, I did put that foil over the top of the panda and I'm rubbing it in well with my finger, burnishing it nicely to make sure all that foil transfers to the panda. I then die cut the panda again from some white card, and I'm actually going to make 2 pandas with this. So I coloured in the pieces of the white card that I needed to be black, and I'm going to piece those into place like I did on the previous one. And then for this panda I'm going to use the foil pieces where the panda would normally have white. So I'll just piece that all together, and I won't show it, but I will use the other foil one to make a panda that's basically the reverse. It's white and foil rather than black and foil, and I will use that on the next card. For my background panel I'm going to use Twilight Ink, which is a nice grey ink, and the happy birthday sentiment that came in the panda stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that repeatedly to create a pattern. And this is a fun way to add a sentiment to a card. So I don't actually have a focal sentiment on this card, but it's clearly a birthday card because it does have happy birthday stamped all over it. I then die cut it out with a mama elephant die and adhered my foiled panda onto it. I have again added a pink nose and those ebony black Nuvo drop eyes. I created a frame with some of the pattern paper, again using a mama elephant die, and adhered that to a black card base, and then I popped up my focal panel in the centre, and that completed card number 4. For my 5th card, as I said, I'm going to use the other foiled panda, so that's already done. I'm also going to use the negative portions of my die cutting from card 2, so that's ready as well, which meant that the only thing I actually needed to prepare here was my sentiment. Once again, I'm going to do some white heat embossing on black cardstock. So I prepped it with my anti-static powder tool, stamped the sentiment with embossing ink, and then I'm putting the white embossing powder onto that. I'll then use my Wow Dual Speed heat gun on the setting 2 to melt the embossing powder, and then I used a craft knife and my cutter line to trim the panel down, and I didn't show that because my head got in the way all the time, so I thought you didn't really want to stare at the back of my head. I've arranged all the paper pieces onto a card base, and I'm going to use Tombow Monomulti liquid glue again to adhere the pieces into place. And I do use my reverse tweezers to help me with this. I think it's just easier than using just my fingers. And I will just get all of those pieces stuck down into place. Using the liquid glue means I have time to shift things if they're not quite aligned, so that I can make sure they are lined up as well as I want them to be. And whilst I'm just gluing this down, I will say that there are links to the products I have used in the description box down below. I believe this card kit's already sold out. The September card kit has been revealed, but I will link to the stamp set and the die, for example, which are available separately. And where possible, I will use affiliate links as well for my product list, because that just helps to support the channel, and it means that I can keep making these videos if you shop with those. So if you do decide to buy with the affiliate links, then thank you very much for your support. Having got my final panel into place, I'm going to adhere the panda down. As I said, this is the other of the foil pandas I made, and it's the reverse of the previous one. I actually think I prefer the other panda. I think I liked the black with the foil more than I like the white with the foil. Maybe you feel differently. You could let me know in the comments which of the two you prefer, or maybe you don't like the foiling on the panda at all. That's another option. So I'll just press the panda into place, and I noticed that on one side he wasn't quite adhered down, so I will use my tweezers to lift that piece up and just put a little bit of extra glue under there so I can make sure he's properly secured. And that will complete card number 5, which was really easy because everything was basically done already. I'm going to be doing some colouring again for card number 6, not quite as involved as the colouring I did on card 3, but I will start by stamping the panda that's holding the cake with my MFT ink onto a snippet of Nina Solar White 80 £, cardstock, which is good for alcohol markers. I put the cupcake pattern paper just on the screen next to my panda because I'm going to be using that as colour inspiration for colouring in the image. First I coloured the panda itself with kind of pale creamy colours for the shading. I thought that was more appropriate than greys, it made it look more alive, I think. I then used browns for the cake and pink for the icing, and then I went through the other colours that are on the pattern paper, so blue and orange and green, and used those to add the sprinkles and the colour on the candles. I then put the panel back into my MISTI and stamped it again with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which gives a nice rich black impression and I think really helped finish off the image. And then I will carefully fussy cut that out. I don't know if there are coordinating dies for this. I believe sometimes the stamp sets that come in the kits will later have dies to go with them, I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, it wasn't too difficult to fussy cut out, and if you have a scan and cut or similar, then you can just use that to cut the image out. I will then use a watercolour brush tip marker in black to go all around the edges of my fussy cut image, and that will hide the white core where I cut it and just give it a bit more professional look. Looks more finished as well, and you want to make sure you're coming from the back with the marker so you don't accidentally draw on your image. I die cut an oval of orange card to put my panda onto, and I've again white heat embossed a sentiment on black, and I'll adhere that to the oval as well, and that's also acting as my grounding element for the panda. I then adhered my cupcake pattern paper to a green card base, and I'm going to add a strip of this rainbow striped pattern paper. The strip's not actually quite long enough to go the whole way along, so I positioned it so that the gap between the two pieces will be hidden behind the oval and nobody would know the difference. I'm going to edge my panel with glitter peel-offs from Love from Lizzie, which again just helps it look more finished, and I'll use my reverse tweezers to help me push the pieces into place. Excess pieces will be trimmed off and put back onto the sheet, and I do sometimes use even those teeny tiny pieces later, so it's well worth keeping them. I then added my oval with my panda, and that completes card number 6. I really do like how the panda turned out on this one. Moving on to card number 7, this one's going to be colouring as well, but with a difference. I've die cut the green pattern paper with the Mama Elephant dies again. They're the Lafayette frame dies, I think is what they're called. And then I stamped my panda and sentiment directly onto that. So I'm going to be colouring over the design on the pattern paper. Normally when you do this, you might want to use a less intense, shall we say, pattern. The green is quite strong to colour over, so I did have to make sure that the colours I picked were appropriate to go over that. So blues will cover that up nicely, for example. So for the balloon, which is where I started, I used kind of turquoise blues, blue greens, and then I used true blues for the wrapping on the present. For the dots on the present, as well as the ribbon and the party hat, I'm going to use greens, which is an easy choice because that will show up nicely over the top of the green. And I will also come back to the blue and the greeny blue to add the tassel-y bit on the top of the hat. It is important to pay attention to the colours you use when you're colouring on a pattern paper because they will be affected by the colour of the paper. So for example here where I'm using a pink on the bottom of the feet, I went with a stronger coloured pink than I normally would because I knew that would help cover that green. If you have a spare piece of the pattern paper, you could always use that to test your colours before committing to them. Now obviously I want the white of my panda to be white, so here I'm going to use a colouring pencil, and this is a Caran d'Ache white pencil which gives really good coverage. It won't completely disguise the pattern of the pattern paper, but as I work in the layers and build it up, it does really make the panda nice and white and helps him stand out from the background. And I will work in several layers with that. I didn't worry too much on the white about the shadows and light source. I just wanted to make sure that the white looked white. Before stamping my image again, I'm going to just quickly go in with some grey to give him some grounding, which I almost forgot to do, which is why it's already back in my MISTI. I'll then stamp over the image with my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I think actually that richer black helps to bring out the white even more by contrast, so I do recommend doing that. Just make sure you've left the stamps in your MISTI to make sure that you won't stamp it, especially after putting all that time into doing the colouring. I added some white highlights with my gel pen, and then I started assembling my card. So I'm going to use the outside piece of that pattern paper, and you could just inset the image into it again, maybe popped up, and that would look interesting, but I did decide to use the inner piece of the frame that I'd used on card 4. You can see I die cut some pieces from the centre of that as well. I didn't actually end up using them on any of my cards, but having them die cut means I can use them in future. I like to conserve my papers where possible, so I do try to cut away centres that will be hidden as much as possible. But once I'd popped up my focal panel, that completed card number 7. I'm then going to try some embossing with the die for card number 8. This was actually an idea I had really early on, and I finally thought, well, let's go ahead and do that. This die actually embossed really nicely. The sandwich you need for your embossing will depend on what machine you're using, so make sure you pay attention to that. In hindsight, I should have done the 2 edge bears first, rather than working from right to left, because I realised at the end that I needed one just very slightly on the edge, but I wouldn't have been able to run it through my machine because it's not wide enough. So I have a kind of blank space on that left hand side, which is a little bit annoying, but not the end of the world, so we'll just pretend that didn't happen. I then have another die cut panda, which I cut from white card and coloured the pieces that I needed to be black with my black marker. I'm going to assemble them directly onto my card base, again using the Tombow glue and my reverse tweezers to help me get everything into position. As you can see, I have a panel of pattern paper that I'm going to use at the bottom of my card, and before adhering this into place, I'm going to add a sentiment onto it. So I placed the pattern paper into my MISTI and worked out how I wanted the sentiment positioned, and I'm using Happy Birthday, and then I'm going to add another one of the sentiments just below that, and I tried to position it so it would be centered in respect to my panda once I added it on. I also off screen used a black pencil to add stitch detailing to the top and bottom of that panel, and then I popped it up on my card base, which completed card number 8. So then we're on to the penultimate card, card number 9. Here once again I'm going to be doing some colouring with one of the pandas. I really enjoyed these pandas actually, they're so cute. And I started by stamping the party hat, masked it off, and then I'm going to stamp the lying down panda. And you can see I have the pattern paper that I gutted away from my panel on card 1, and I'm again using that as a guideline for my colours for colouring in the image. So I'm working with that rainbow of colours, and you can see all the colours I have used on screen. And as before, I used kind of caramelly, creamy colours to add the shading to the panda because I thought that looked more realistic than using grey. I did use the grey to add my grounding though. For the sentiment, instead of white embossing on black, I decided to black emboss on some vellum, just for something a bit different. Vellum does work well for embossing, but you want to not keep the heat on it too long because you don't want it to burn. I left the strip longer than my panel so that I could wrap it around at the back and adhere it on the back, because that way I didn't have to worry about adhesive showing through. I did realise it was popping up a bit at the front, so I opened it back up and put a few little dots of liquid glue behind the letters on the sentiment because that would help hold it down. I added a touch of sparkle with the glitter pen to the party hat and also the panda's bow tie, and then I adhered the panel to a black card base and edged it with some more peel-offs from Love from Lizzie. These are the black glitter peel-offs, and I used the widest ones because there's quite a wide area of card base showing around, so I thought that would work best. And once those are all in place, I will add some Nuvo drops to the panda's eyes. I went with white this time, I'm not sure why, I just thought I'd try that. And that will complete my penultimate card. For my final card, I decided to go with something really quick and simple, and I'm just going to create a rainbow of sentiments. And this actually worked perfectly because the 7 sentiments fit really nicely on the space of the card base, so I really didn't even have to put that much thought into it. I think I had to move the card base 3/4 of an inch each time, but if you want to recreate this, make sure you check that yourself. I wouldn't want you to mess up and blame me. So I'm using the same colours for my stamping as I had used for the rainbow of pandas on card number 1. And just working a colour at a time and shifting the card base down. I did make sure to clean my stamp in between each colour, and where there was a significant colour change, like between the green and the yellow, I made sure to stamp off a few times onto a piece of scrap paper to make sure that there wouldn't be any colour transfer there. And once I had got all the way up to the top of my card, I did decide to finish off by adding some scored lines either side of the sentiments. This just kind of helps frame it in and add a bit more interest, but you wouldn't have to do this if you don't want to. As I said, this was really quick and easy design, and I really like how it worked out, even if it didn't have any of those cute pandas on it. So that completes my final card. I hope you enjoyed these birthday cards using the Simon Says Stamp August card kit. As I mentioned earlier, all the products used are in the description box below, along with a link to my blog post if you'd like to read that. Please do let me know in the comments which of these cards was your favourite. I'm always really interested to know. If you did enjoy this video, you can press the like button down below to let me know, and if you didn't, then the dislike button is right next to it. I would love it if you'd subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and you can do so by pressing the logo showing on screen now. And there are also a couple of other videos showing there if you'd like to see more from me straight away. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!